Hi, welcome back to my Sketchbook Systems series. If you're new here, I'm Megan. I'm an aspiring children's illustrator, and with this series I'm aiming to show you how I use multiple sketchbooks on the go at the same time to bounce off each other and work towards creating children's illustrations for picture books. Now, I used to struggle in the past with rushing towards the final piece, rushing towards that destination, that known end goal of being like, this is what I want to create and I'm going to go and do it right now. And I sort of forgot about or kind of avoided the development stages, which wasn't great because I started to feel like maybe I'm missing out a bit. Like, I was pretty happy with what I was creating, but who knows like what other ideas might have sprouted off of, you know, that particular project if I'd allowed myself to experiment. And so now it's not that I don't know where I'm going, I still have that final destination of that final piece in mind initially, you know, because I always seem to have a bit of a clear vision of where I want to go at the start of the project, so I get excited about that. That's still the case. So I still have that final destination, but it's just that now with this new system, perhaps I'm choosing to take the scenic route to get there instead of like heading straight towards it and rushing there, speeding all the way there. It's, you know, taking the scenic route, taking it in, exploring your surroundings before you get to that end goal. And what that looks like for me, taking the scenic route, is I start with a small sketchbook. So I start with an A4 sketchbook, and I think of this as more of a design book, and really this is where I experiment a lot and I create and design this world that my characters are going to live in. And I just take the time to sort of step into this book, step into this world, and really just explore. And it tends to be a bit more messy. It's got like thumbnails, colour experiments, scribbly doodles, anything really that just helps me work through my ideas and sort of flesh out this world. And once I sort of know what that world's going to look like, once I've got a real idea of the themes that I'm going for, I then take this first A3 sketchbook, and it's this like scrappy sketchbook, and I start the line art, the sort of final line art. So at this point I already know what my composition, my layout's going to be, and this is just me sort of solidifying that, refining it. So we've moved on from like a design book, a design stage, onto more solid illustration stage. And the reason I separate these books, so I've got two A3 sketchbooks. I've got this more scrappy looking one, and then there's slightly more upmarket one here. Reason I do that is so that with the line art I can just go over and over again, rubbing out until I get it right. You know, I have a tendency to be a bit of a perfectionist, and I don't want that getting in the way of when I start applying colour. When I paint watercolour onto it, for example, if I'd like rubbed out the line art a million and one times, it would have really got trapped in there. So I use this sketchbook, I then trace over the line art once I've really sort of, I've locked it in, I know what I'm doing, where I'm going with it, it's final. I put it into this second A3 sketchbook, and this is the colour stage, this is the final illustration stage. So that's how it works for me. That's sort of a brief overview of the sketchbook system. Feel free to look back at the first video about the Foodie family to hear more. But yeah, I think what I really love about this system is being able to have that small sketchbook next to one of the big sketchbooks, and it's just really dynamic, like having them bounce off each other, you know, referring back, flicking through the pages and finding a colour scheme or a pattern or an idea or something from that design book, and like transferring it over and comparing them, seeing how they work. You know, sometimes I feel like that sort of frazzled academic at the library, you know, big desk with all the sprawling papers everywhere, and you're grabbing them and you're connecting different ideas. You go, this connects with this and this connects with this, and eureka, I've got it, you know. It's nice to have something to bounce off of. And I think it's okay sometimes, and probably best, at least for me in an artistic process, to be a bit chaotic, to be a bit messy, and let things just, you know, have a life of their own. So that's what I like about this system, rather than it being just one big book and you feel you feel sort of heavy with it. You feel like it's this almost artifact. The book itself is a presentation. With this, it's more circular. It's this living thing in a way. You know, you're allowing your ideas to grow and develop, as well as the world that's going to be set in. And speaking of the world it's going to be set in, what I use this sketchbook system for, at least at the moment, is a personal project. It's an original picture book concept, maybe not fully fleshed out yet, but essentially the concept is there's a series of families, and within their family units they've got this really strong shared interest or hobby, and I just have a lot of fun with being really exaggerative with that. You know, I turn that hobby almost into a visual theme, and I really run with it. So the way they decorate their house, the way they decorate themselves, their outfits, you know, the pets that they choose to have, you know, it all comes in to this hobby, this theme. And yeah, I can just get really maximalist with my designs and just have a lot of fun. And so this week on this sketchbook system series video, I'll be talking you through from design process to end illustration with the athletics family. So they're really big on anything that's active, anything that's sporty, and that's what brings them together, makes them happy. And so you'll see in this video I take a bit of an interesting interpretation of that theme. So I hope you enjoy, and let's get into it. So, the way I approach things initially in this small sketchbook is just by jotting down all my visual ideas for the interior design. Often that ends up being a scribbly mess, but here I went for more of a mood board look, a bit more curated. Perhaps it's against the spirit of the small sketchbook, a bit too neatly presented rather than experimental. But to be fair, I got a lot of motivation out of looking back at this nice page. Usually I take a while experimenting with colour schemes, but for this family, bam, I was straight in there with true blue, emerald and chartreuse, a fresh colour combination. I was thinking, what do you want when you're working out, when you're sweating? You want a refreshment, a beverage, maybe a lemonade, or perhaps a water with lemons in it if you're the health conscious type. And that's how the sub-theme of citrus was born. I wanted these colours to really zing. So we've got the first sub-theme, citrus. I then started to weave in another sub-theme, Greece. And the reason for this is that I was thinking about the Olympics, as you do, and how the first Olympics were set in Greece. Then that got me to thinking about the ancient Greek architecture, all the white columns and marble masonry. I thought white would go really well with the colour scheme. And you may be thinking, well duh Megan, white goes with everything. But if you've seen my other work, you may notice that I almost never included white or blank spaces in my designs before. Every square inch of paper is often taken up with bold colours and patterns. So in this design, the fact that I took a step back and allowed my already pretty tight colour scheme room to breathe is a bit different for me. You'll see here as well a key motif I ran with, the lightning bolt. Now, for me, this harmonises the two sub-themes of the athletic family, citrus and Greece. Citrus because of the way that the neon yellow really zings, and Greece because of that link to Greek mythology, to Zeus, the god of thunder and lightning. Once I had this symbol of the lightning bolt, I started thinking about geometric shapes in general, and that's something I really ran with. The squares of the tiles, that's then reflected in the square shape of the lockers, and then the circles of this pegboard texture over here. And they're all references to locker rooms too, where you hang up your sports kit of course. So you may have noticed at this point that I've been blabbing for a while about the ideas page. And that's because with this project, the ideas just kept rolling onto one, onto another, they just kept rolling on and on, bouncing off of each other. And if you're an artist, you'll know that that feeling was pretty rare. And perhaps part of the reason why is because of the theme, athletics. Now, I have a confession to make, which is that I'm not the biggest fan of sports, or at least I'm certainly not very good at them. PE was always my worst subject. And so I don't necessarily have a lot to relate to in terms of the theme. But that's why I had to work so hard to find an in. And when you find an in into something, especially something that you don't necessarily relate to straight off the bat, I feel like you really strengthen your connection to it and you really get a bit more creative. And so for me, I was thinking, well, okay, maybe I don't really sport so much, but what links to that I like? You know, what do I like? And I thought, well, I like lemons, and I think Greek mythology is pretty cool, and so that's why I decided to link those in there. You know, find my personal narrative in this theme. And I think, yeah, I think it's great sometimes to have limitations. It's all about setting rules and then pushing them as far as you can sometimes. And that's a real way to get a bit more imaginative, I think, if you're trying to think of ways to break out of your usual routines in terms of art. You know, pick a theme that isn't very you and find a way to make it you. It's kind of like back at uni, you know, you'd be given a brief with limitations like you can only use a black marker and pink paper and good luck. And you'd think, well, it's not my first choice, certainly, but if I have to use those mediums, then you can bet that I'll be getting as creative as I possibly can with them. And oftentimes it's those sorts of briefs with those really like slim rules that end up creating some of your best work, because I think that's where your style and your voice really come through when it's tested, you know, when it's tested with a limitation. And so yeah, maybe that's why I got so creative and frankly a little wacky with this theme, with these illustrations, because you know, athletics is something a bit different for me. So yeah, after that little tangent, shall we get on with it?
And here we are on a thumbnail page, albeit a tad minimal. Normally my thumbnails are more detailed than this, showing all the furniture and how my characters are going to interact with it, but I think with this one I was focusing on the room layout and specifically the perspective of it. For this children's book project, I was pretty new at drawing in perspective, so I was challenging myself to do a different angle for every double page. And with this angle, I had a bit of a light bulb moment. This is where it truly sank in that everything works in a grid. And I know, some of you will be thinking, well yeah Megan, that's just the grid method, used for all perspective drawings. But the thing is, when starting out on my mission to learn perspective, I didn't really research into it, I kinda winged it, looking up lots of references of rooms and copying them, and taking parts from each and combining them into my own layouts. After doing it by rote for a while, things started to click, and especially for this page where I had tiles and pegboard holes at the intersections of every line. Naturally, a grid appeared, and I knew enough about the basics to know that you have two known entities, the straight line in the middle of the room and the diagonal of the wall's edge. So I gradually angled the lines closer and closer to the diagonal edge. Then, when creating square tiles on top, I realised you have to space out the vertical lines more as you go along to keep the square sides even. And there we are, a perspective grid! Took me an embarrassing amount of time to get there, but this realisation helped me out in all future illustrations. And hey, maybe learning something through doing helps solidify the knowledge more than just reading about it. But then again, maybe that's just me trying to feel better about it. I don't know. Moving on now to the second sketchbook. New to the sketchbook system, it's an in-between book, a purgatory between design and execution, you could say. This is where I create the line art and I can rework it to my heart's content. It's that same layout as the thumbnail, but luckily, this time, I've got more details to tell you about. And firstly, here's the sofa. It's a little strange and looks a bit like an inflatable, but I'm trying something new. It reminds me more of postmodern design rather than mid-century design, which is what I usually gravitate towards. And it got me to thinking about the 80s or 90s as a possible influence for this family's designs. I wondered if that era would work well for an athletics theme, especially because it's the time when athleisure was really taking off. Along those lines, I wanted my characters to be sneakerheads, since there was a big boom in name brands for sportswear at the time, and collectors started popping up all over the place. So, we've got a sneaker wall here to show off their obsession. And taking you over here, we've got that Greek influence making an appearance. It's a Grecian column, And right at the top of the column, what is it? Why, it's a pyramid of lemons and limes, of course. Because when you're working out, that's just what you need. So what you do, you see, you take your lemon, you take your lime, and you take it over to this other column and get some water out of the cooler. And then what you do is you saunter on over to that water fountain and put some ice in there. And there you are, a refreshing post-workout beverage. As you can probably tell from the way I'm talking, I think this design is quite out there, but I like it. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in an apartment with gym linoleum flooring? Couple of lemons, couple of columns, living the dream, I say. So, now it's time for our final background. Zing! That's how I want this room to feel. Zingy, fresh. We've got some more nods to sports with the skateboards hung on the wall instead of your typical wall art. And of course, they're adorned with that running motif, the lightning bolt. We've got a Grecian vase holding umbrellas. I want it to feel like this family is always on the move, come rain or shine. And I've put sweat towels and a fan handily on top of these mini locker tables. I try to have a combination of form and function in a room design. Yes, even in this room. If you're wondering about my process for this page, I used a mixed media approach. I always use a combination of watercolour and coloured pencils, and sometimes add more layers in. Like here, I've used chalk markers to make the lines on the floor and to help brighten the tiles. I must say I got a bit frustrated with the chalk marker here though, since it kept clumping up or just not flowing enough. I used it to try and cover up mistakes with the tile grouting too, since watercolour was the wrong choice for drawing thin lines. I should have gone with pencil for that. But you live and you learn. It's not my best execution, but I do really like the unique design I've gone for with this family at least. Going back now to the small sketchbook for some fashion designs. This page may be familiar to you because it's the shared page where I also created the outfits for the foodie family. That's the thing about the small design book, you get to be messy. It's not a presentation but instead an exploration of ideas. And the ideas here, I think, are a lot more fun since I got to be more experimental and bold, considering I was going for an athleisure look. This is where that post-modern design comes back in again with an aerobics influence. All that lycra and neon colours to reflect the 80s. And then for the dad's outfit, we've got a stripy sports vest, which doesn't need the logo to say it, but is definitely a reference to Adidas. Again, it's our old friend the lightning bolt, and here I started really thinking about the actual shape of it. It's geometric, it's got this diagonal line. What does it remind me of? Oh yeah, the Nike swoosh. And so I used it on the side of her cycling shorts and on the side of his running shorts in much the same way, this graphic, sporty shape. I think it's nice to reference things sometimes and get a bit of intertext going on. It adds to the richness of a world and it allows a viewer to empathise more with it, which can be important when I start going so off-piste with things. And here's a bit of a moment for you, a lightning shape cut out in her leotard. Very bold. So from here we move on to line art. For some reason I can't find the line art of the sun, but here we have the couple anyway. I think I can notice my people drawing skills getting stronger with each illustration that I do. Now you may be looking at the pose and thinking, are you sure this is the athletic family? I thought, athletic family, they're sporty, they're sneakerheads. I was expecting them to be doing something a bit more intense, like running, weightlifting. What are they doing yoga for? Well, you see, this family has a dog, and with all the families I try to get them to circle around the dog's characteristics. So with the foodie family, the dog is a Labrador, naturally known as big eaters. And with this family, the dog is a Whippet, naturally known as active dogs, always running. And with dogs in general, one thing you may notice is that they tend to do this absolutely massive stretch all the time. It's such a thing that in yoga they invented a pose called downward dog that imitates it. Hence my choice to make this family do yoga together. So there you are. Right then, time for the final characters. Overall, I'm pretty happy with them, but wish I'd added more tone with coloured pencil to really make them pop. When I took them to be cut out digitally and placed on the background, I struggled to even find the white socks. And then, when placed against the background, I just don't think they were bold enough. So that's what I'd change. That and maybe the pose of the boy. He looks more like he's being held at gunpoint rather than practicing yoga, if you ask me. I don't know, maybe he's just not a fan of exercise. Well, I still like his outfit. It's a windbreaker, so has these dynamic lines on it and brings in that 80s influence again. From here, I took all the final elements from my illustration sketchbook and brought them into Clip Studio Paint to clean up, cut out and assemble. I'm really happy with the interior and fashion designs that went into this. It's a project where my design side from my small sketchbook practice really fed into my illustration side. I think there's a lot of energy here from my creative process, and hopefully that adds to all the active energy of the characters' lives. I hope you've enjoyed seeing my creative process, even if it was a little strange this time. Thank you so much for watching, and keep an eye out for more videos in this Sketchbook Systems series. Bye for now!